Welcome to episode 104 of the G2 on 5G. It's the latest inside scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics in about 20 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, and joining me again this week is fellow analyst Anshel Sag. Let's get started with my first topic. And Qualcomm announced an acquisition this week of Cellwize. And so my question of the day, is it a smart move? I think it is. So there's no doubt that Qualcomm has been pushing into the infrastructure space in RAN in particular. Anshel and I have talked about that on numerous podcasts. And what Cellwize brings is an automation platform, which will be super critical from just an overall RAN deployment perspective. And what I like about Cellwize's capabilities is that its architecture can support Open RAN, vRAN, as well as traditional RAN infrastructure, and what are also referred to as multi-generational support scenarios. So this really, from my perspective, strengthens Qualcomm's overall push into infrastructure. Automation is going to be key in these service provider networks. As you and I know, Anshel, one of the metrics that mobile network operators are measured by is churn. And you want a highly reliable network, and automation is going to be a big key part of that, not only for service providers, but within enterprise networks and private 5G networks as well. But what's your take on this?
I think it's an interesting, and it's an acquisition that makes sense in a lot of ways. It's been rumored for a couple months now.
Sure.
So this was kind of not really a surprise to anybody at this point. What I do think is interesting is kind of what you pointed on, which is this is a complete orchestration solution for not just one type of RAN,
Right.
and it will help simplify someone looking to deploy something new like vRAN or Open RAN, but still want to be able to control and use and orchestrate their different pieces of infrastructure. So.
Yeah.
I think this is a good play. I'll be honest, I'm surprised they didn't get acquired earlier,
Yeah.
or sooner by someone else wanting to do this. Because realistically, I think that if you want to be a competitive player in the Open RAN space, you either need to have an extremely deep relationship on the software side, or you need to just own it. And I think a lot of companies are starting to realize that they need to own it rather than allow a partner to, do that orchestration for them, because that partner could get acquired, like I'm sure has happened to a lot of Cellwize's customers. So we'll see how this kind of shakes out in the long term. But I think a lot of these software solutions for Open RAN are gonna get gobbled up, as they have been.
Yeah, and that's a great insight on the complexity with Open RAN. And we've talked about that on prior podcasts. Just the whole, nature of the disaggregation and the fact that you've got all these new players that are entering the RAN ecosystem with Open RAN. It just requires, just another level set of orchestration and automation capabilities. So, I've been following Cellwize for a while, and I agree with you. I'm surprised that it took this long for them to get acquired. Maybe they weren't ready to get acquired, at that point, but certainly being acquired by a company like Qualcomm is quite compelling. So, but let's move to your first topic. And we've been discussing this subject on prior podcasts with Dish and its need to have certain coverage by this time of the year, or they were going to get levied, a multi-billion-dollar fine. And so you want to provide an update.
Yeah. So first of all, they say they've launched their 5G service in 120 cities. If you look at the cities where they've launched, I would say that the biggest cities are probably like Dallas, Houston, and Orlando. There's no mention of New York or LA or like San Diego or Seattle or Portland. It's a lot of tier 2 cities.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting. I think their biggest market that they've launched in might be Houston or Dallas. But it's interesting because a lot of people are really having a hard time ordering the service. So it's the project, the 5G network is being called Project Genesis. And they've published a list on their website which we'll include in the description. But basically, they've got this list of 120 cities, and then if you hit order now, it basically drives you to a new page that asks you to put your email address in, and then you put in your actual physical address and check for availability. And they say that they can allow you to experience the first their cloud native 5G network, the first of its kind in the US, and that they've got smart 5G, and there will be rewards for helping them improve their network. So you can even join a beta list where people can test out the network and provide feedback about their experience. So this is this is a network launch. I think the biggest challenge is just going to be verifying what coverage really looks like. I'm sure they're going to keep that coverage map very close to their chest for quite some time.
Right.
But it seems like they may have avoided this issue with the FCC. But I'm sure they're going to have a lot of competitors who want their spectrum, questioning that.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, this is a good time to announce it. We're going to have Sean Kinney. He's the editor-in-chief of RCR Wireless on the podcast next week, and he's going to provide some further color on this subject. But it'll be interesting. I like the whole notion of smart 5G. It'll be interesting to sort of unpack that, over the coming months to really understand what they're talking about. It makes me think that there's some edge enablement there. But I have been pretty adamant on prior podcasts around Dish and their need to really differentiate themselves and go to market differently. They're not going to be effective if they go head to head with the heavyweights and AT&T and Verizon and T-Mobile. So from my perspective, they're going to have to focus on some discrete services, do something with IoT similar to what T-Mobile recently launched with its TIoT initiative. But it'll be interesting. So we'll definitely be keeping tabs on it. We look forward to having Sean on the podcast next week and to get his take on things. So let's move to my second topic this week. And Google Cloud Platform finally announced its private 5G offering. And my initial question is it going to be competitive with AWS and Azure that have much more mature offerings in the market? And on the surface, it's a very similar structure to their two main competitors. It's sort of a best of breed with respect to some specific partners. Betacom is a network design company. They're going to be involved. Boingo Wireless, who I haven't been really too high on in the past with their airport and airplane service. But I found it interesting, Crown Castle, big tower company, but Celona. And I've spoken about Celona in the past. They're that little nifty startup that's doing private 5G. It's a turnkey solution. They're involved with a company called Kajit. And the way it sounds like Google's positioning things from a private perspective is that Celona is going to be focused on kind of smart building deployments in real estate, whereas Kajit is going to be directed towards school placements. And obviously, both of those companies leverage CBRS spectrum. So on the surface, it's very similar to what AWS and Azure are doing. And really, at the end of the day, they are very, very late to the party. I'm surprised it's taken them this long. And at this point, I'm wondering how difficult it's going to be for them to be competitive with two other incumbents that are much stronger. But would love to get your take on this.
I think they're a little late, but I'll also say that while they may be a little late, I don't really think anyone has really deployed anything meaningful enough for this to be really truly considered late to market.
Okay.
I think they're late to announce, but I think they still have time to deploy. And I think that when you look at what's available today, a lot of it's still fairly small deployments. And this could just be Google taking their time. That said, we've seen them kind of be late to other things as well.
Yeah.
So this might just be, the pace that Google Cloud moves at. Unfortunately, that pace has kept them solidly in third place behind Azure and AWS. So I think realistically, they need to have this offering, but I'm not really sure if it really puts them at too much of a disadvantage of being, to market, third
Yeah.
out of the
I,
big cloud players.
yeah, I know. I tend to, agree with you on that point. What we've probably really seen to date have been like a lot of proof of concepts with AWS and Azure for operators. And, if I sort of think back to reInvent, I mean, really reInvent, and then even like Mobile World Congress earlier this year, reInvent, was in December of last year, and then Mobile World Congress, obviously February, March. Yeah, I mean, I spent time with AWS, and when I asked about commercial deployments, I didn't get really a lot of details there, but just got a lot of details on POCs and tests and that sort of thing. So, from my perspective, it may be sort of a market perception thing, and it's sort of like no one got fired for buying IBM. Lately in the cloud space, no one got fired for for spinning up an instance of AWS, and Azure has been hot on their heels, especially with a lot of key acquisitions in the telco space, and they've really kind of closed the gap. And from my perspective, both have very, very broad telco cloud offerings for the mobile network operators, and and they've leveraged that for their private 5G offerings as well. So yeah, time will tell, but again, a little late to the party, but time will tell, and it'll be interesting to sort of keep tabs on this to see where GCP lands. But let's go to your second topic this week. And I caught this announcement from T-Mobile. Man, lately it seems like T-Mobile's been, announcing 2 or 3 things almost on a weekly basis. And this is around their coverage beyond initiative. And you wanted to share the details of that with our viewers and listeners and provide some insight. So I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, so actually, it's 3 announcements in the
Oh,
last
okay.
week,
Okay.
which is kind of wild.
Yeah.
So first is Coverage Beyond. This is like their new Uncarrier branded announcement. Really, what it amounts to is they are trying to uh, take advantage of the fact that people are traveling this summer, and they want to give people access to on the top tier plan. So you have to have a T-Mobile Max plan, which is their most expensive plan. I'm on that plan right now, but it has the most features, and it's what they're trying to what T-Mobile is trying to do is, instead of raising prices, which a lot of their competitors have done, is they're trying to just push people into the more expensive plans. That way they don't have to raise prices on anybody, which is an interesting strategy, but it's a strategy nonetheless. And one of the ways that they can do that is by offering capabilities, features, and benefits. So that's what they're doing with this. They're offering 5 gigs of high speed data worldwide in 210 countries around the world, which is for Magenta Max and Business Unlimited Ultimate customers, which are both top tier plans. And what's awesome about that is previously they offered none. They did offer free international roaming at 2G speeds, and you would have to pay $5 a gig. I think it was $5 a gig. It might be $10 a gig, but you had to pay basically as you go. Actually, it might be like $5 for 500 megabytes. It was not a great deal.
Not a great deal.
So, and I've done that before, and I wasn't, thrilled, but it allowed me to do stuff like, use Google Maps, check email, etc.
Right.
Which is still cheaper than what a lot of other companies were charging. But this is 5 gigs for free. I'm going to assume per month. And honestly, 5 gigs is great for if you're somewhere abroad for maybe a week.
Yeah.
Even if you're gone for 2 weeks, I still think you can make 5 gigs work without necessarily having to turn off data or get kicked down to 2 gigs or 2G. So I think it's a good thing. They're, on addition to that, they're also allowing free full flight in-flight connectivity with most of the U.S. major airlines like Delta, American, and Alaska, with United to follow. But they kind of already offer that. I mean, I've been a T-Mobile customer for a while, and I've had free streaming for a long time. So I think that's maybe not a big deal. I think they're just kind of expanding it to more airlines. I fly Alaska a lot, so that's probably why I'm used to it. And then on top of that, they're giving people 25 cents a month, 25 cents on Shell gas per gallon. So that's kind of what they're doing there. In addition to that, they did announce that they are now going to have 3 carrier aggregation. And what that allows them to do is to reach speeds of up to 3 gigabits per second without millimeter wave. So they were able to do this with 2.5 gigahertz and two 2.5 gigahertz channels and one 1900 megahertz channel with an effective total aggregate bandwidth of 210 megahertz. And they were able to do that with a Galaxy S22. I'm going to assume it was a 22 Ultra. Yeah, I think it's pretty crazy. I was just in Austin this week, and I was getting the mid-band coverage almost citywide, and everywhere I went, I got anywhere from 500 to 750 megabits per second, including when I had dinner with Pat, our principal analyst. So, actually, he's now CEO. We're principal analysts.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was really interesting to see that. And then the third announcement, which I know it feels like I'm dragging on here, but they also announced a partnership with Oceus, and that is a defense contractor, basically a defense contractor that helps deliver connectivity services to the U.S. government, specifically Defense Department. So, T-Mobile's kind of just rapid firing different major announcements across the company. And I think individually, each of these announcements isn't that big of a deal. But when you combine all three of them, it really shows you the kind of momentum that T-Mobile is moving with in terms of, their network partnerships and just maximizing value for their customers.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's impressive to see what they're doing with carrier aggregation and the speeds that they're hitting there, and that'll hopefully come to a metropolitan location near you. But from my perspective, this just really demonstrates that they've done most of the heavy lifting. Now they're fine tuning. And I'm going to talk about Verizon as my third topic, when companies like Verizon are still deploying their mid-band, right? So yeah, and we've sort of talked about this. This is going to give them an advantage. Verizon and AT&T will close the gap, but they're making hay with it right now. It's quite impressive. I'd like to state one thing just on kind of the coverage and Coverage Beyond program. I think it's masterful, like all of the the goodies that you get when you sign up for the various plans with T-Mobile. And I'd love to see AT&T, who is my primary mobile network carrier, forge a deal with American Airlines. As much as I've been on an airplane so far this month, and the second half of the year is looking just as hectic. So AT&T, American Airlines, shout out to both of you guys there. So, but let me move to my third and final topic. I want to talk about Verizon, and it's no surprise they spent a lot of money in C-band. And they are deploying that. And, we're getting confirmations of that from many of our journalist colleagues that Anshel and I talked to. But they're also testing CBRS for 5G deployment. And this is nothing new. So they've been using CBRS spectrum assets for its LTE network. And Verizon claims that they see up to an 80% increase in speed after deploying CBRS. So this week, the announcement was around a test with Ericsson, where they completed a 5G data session using the CBRS General Authorized Access, or GAA spectrum. Verizon has spent a lot of money on PAL. It's nearly $2 billion to augment what they did with C-band. And I found it interesting. A lot of it covers small to mid-sized markets, which CBRS is ideally suited for, sort of the gap fill. No surprise there. But their single PAL license in LA County was $52 million. So talk about going Hollywood, right? So it's interesting. They've invested tons and tons of money in spectrum, but I think it's interesting to see them using some of the CBRS spectrum to gap fill. And there's no announced timeline on when they're going to flip the switch and go into production for 5G, but certainly the test is the first step, and we should see this happen sort of over time. And I think this is an opportunity for them to accelerate their much needed mid-band deployment, but would love to get your take on it.
Yeah, I think CBRS is, obviously a challenge with, having to share the spectrum.
Right.
I think you're right that in places where there are fewer incumbents, it's a lot easier to use, and just in less dense populated areas because you can use it outdoors much more easily and freely,
Yeah.
and there's much less of a chance of interference. So I think it definitely makes a lot of sense in smaller markets, and we'll see how it really looks long term. I think 4G was kind of a test vehicle for them,
Yeah.
and I think that them transitioning it to 5G will really be, I think, what their long term plan always was, and I think it'll be easier for us to assess whether or not their strategy makes sense and whether or not they're able to execute when it gets to 5G. So I think we're going to probably see over the next year or two what the impact of Verizon's use of CBRS is. Because I think if you look at it, they're kind of a leader in the space, and everybody else is pretty much following them. And I think it was more of a necessity thing, just because Verizon didn't have that much spectrum for a very long time in 5G, and so I think they started in 4G, and they've got some agreements in place, and like you said, some licenses as well. So we'll see how that looks long term. But I think this was a strategy born out of a lack of spectrum, which I actually just saw a report that said that even with all of the spectrum holdings that Verizon and AT&T have acquired, they're both still like 25% less spectrum than what T-Mobile has today. So it'll be very interesting to see how CBRS helps them fill that gap and whether or not it will be effective.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it's sort of a tweener. It's sort of a gap fill, but when something is scarce, you don't have enough of something like mid-band. It helps. So, but let's move to your third and final topic this week. And speaking of C-band, you want to provide an update on this whole FAA airline hoo-ha. And I actually saw something come across from our friends at AT&T on this as well, but I haven't had a chance to catch it. But why don't you share it with our viewers and listeners?
Yeah, I haven't actually seen what AT&T has said, but what the FAA, this was a Reuters story. They had the exclusive, and they basically said that the FAA administrator Billy Nolan said in a letter reviewed by Reuters that AT&T and Verizon want to boost C-band 5G services around some airports starting in July after previously delaying their rollout. And basically he was saying that like airlines need to press ahead with their retrofitting of radio altimeters, and that there are no guarantees that all large markets will retain the current safeguards. And it sounds like we still don't even know what aircraft are interfering, because last week we talked about how the NTIA was doing some preliminary testing and they hadn't even found any harmful interference yet. So I think that it's probably very few aircraft, which is probably why the FAA is even pushing this, because it's probably like in maybe the hundreds of aircraft nationwide. Because there's tens of thousands of aircraft, if not hundreds of thousands of aircraft in the United States. But I really don't think this is really that big of a problem for the airlines. And if it is, it's probably very small, and it's probably airplanes that need to be phased out anyways and haven't been.
Exactly. And I've flown a few of these British Airways, flights, but the direct between Heathrow and London, well, Heathrow, London, and Austin, and they need to be taken out of service.
Yeah, it sounds like they've been pressuring these airlines to make upgrades, but once again, this continues to be an issue of money more than anything, because even I'm reading this Reuters article, it says some airlines have raised concerns about paying to retrofit altimeters only to face paying for a replacement in a few years.
Yes.
So these are people, these are airlines that don't want to pay for a new airplane. They also don't want to pay for a retrofit because they're gonna get get rid of the plane in a few years. So it's like, why is that our problem?
Right. Yeah, the drama continues, man. Interesting. We'll probably keep talking about this through the end of the year. But hey, it's been another great podcast this week. Why don't you take us home?
Absolutely. We hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If anyone out there would like to provide insights on a specific 5G topic for a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Will is at Welltown Tech, and I'm at Anshel. We hope you have a great weekend, and please tune in again next week.